Today is April the 13th. We'll look today at the longer ending of the book of Mark, which raises the question, can we trust the Bible in the form that we have it? Let's find out together as we study Mark chapter 16, verses 9 to 14. A few Sundays ago, as Jason was preaching, he mentioned the longer ending of the book of Mark, and the fact that it appears that Mark ends very awkwardly at chapter 16, verse 8. The women fled from the tomb trembling and bewildered. They said nothing to anyone because they were too frightened. What a way to end the gospel. And yet Jason gave a convincing reason why, so that we would ask ourselves too, who is Jesus? But what about the longer ending of the book of Mark? Many of us have Bibles that simply go on. Now, I happen to have here a version of the New Living Translation that at the end of verse 8, there is a shorter ending of Mark, and then there is, with verses, the longer ending of Mark. That merits some exclamation. The fact is, most texts that we have of the book of Mark include verses 9 to 20. The problem is that two of the best manuscripts that we have, a manuscript called Sinaiticus and a manuscript called Vaticanus. They're called that because Sinaiticus was discovered at a hermitage located on what is traditionally today called Mount Sinai. And Vaticanus was located in the archives of the Vatican. These two documents come from the 4th century. They are very, very early, and they don't include the ending of the book of Mark as we have it in our Bibles, verses 9 to 20. The earliest witnesses that we have of verses 9 to 20 are from the 5th century on. Now, you might think it's only 100 years, but that's a long time, considering that we're talking about the 4th century, sometime in the 300s, just 300 years after Jesus, 200 years or so after the writing of the book of Mark. Wow, that's very early. Another 100 years later, they began to add a different ending. Now, this is compounded by the shorter ending of the book of Mark. The shorter ending of the book of Mark sometimes occurs before the longer ending, so you get verse 8, the shorter ending, and then verse 9. Sometimes it occurs at the end of the book of Mark, and sometimes it occurs instead of the longer ending. All of this leads scholars today to believe that the longer ending of the book of Mark was added simply because of the awkwardness, the abruptness of Mark 16:8. So what does the longer ending say? We'll look at half of it today. Verse 9, after Jesus rose from the dead early on Sunday morning, the first person who saw him was Mary Magdalene, the woman from whom he had cast out 7 demons. She went to the disciples who were grieving and weeping and told them what had happened. But when she told them that Jesus was alive and she had seen him, they didn't believe him. This is almost a direct quote from Luke chapter 24, verses 1 to 12. Verse 12 of Mark 16. Afterward, he appeared in a different form to two of his followers who were walking from Jerusalem into the country. They rushed back to tell the others, but no one believed them. This comes from Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 34, the road to Emmaus. And then finally, still later, he appeared to the 11 disciples as they were eating together. This comes from Luke chapter 24, verses 35 to 49. He rebuked them for their stubborn unbelief because they refused to believe those who had seen him after he had been raised from the dead. Mark, or whoever added this to Mark, summarized Luke and just entered it there so that there would be a fit, an apt conclusion to the book of Mark. So what do we believe? Personally, I think Mark ends at verse 8. Do I trust the Bible like I have it? The fact that I believe that there is a different ending to the book of Mark that was composed 400 or so years after the Gospel of Mark and added to it, it doesn't change my view of the resurrection. The resurrection doesn't depend on Mark chapter 16, 9 to 20. There are plenty of other references to Jesus appearing to the disciples. It doesn't change my view of the disciples. In each one of the paragraphs, the disciples didn't believe. I get that. It would have been hard. It doesn't change my view of the Bible. In fact, the very fact that there are scholars who are willing to say this appears to be a later edition actually increases my trust in the Bible. It does mean that we have to be judicious. We have to be careful as we read it. Personally, I don't preach from Mark 16, 9 to 20, because I do believe it was a later edition. But there is nothing in Mark 16, 9 to 20 that I disbelieve. It's all quoted from other portions of Scripture. Can we trust the Bible? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely we can trust the Bible. Be careful as you study it, though. You don't have to study it wondering, I wonder if he really said that. 99.9% of the New Testament is very clear. Very clear. We don't have to doubt it. That 0.1% in most of our editions today are clearly marked, and none of them add things that are foreign to the rest of Scripture. We can trust the Bible. Let's read it and study it more. I encourage you to like and subscribe to this devotional on whatever platform you use to listen to it. Do you have questions for us? Email us at questions@becomehope.com. Tomorrow we will finish the end of chapter 16 of the book of Mark.